Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So today I'll speak about the characteristics of jhana. So far I've been talking about the meditation techniques and about some of the things to watch out for as we work on developing jhana. So today I'll talk about what jhana actually is, as that helps to give us a better sense of what we're aiming at, what we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to experience. So to this end, I've brought a discourse from the Majjhima Nikaya. So this is Majjhima Nikaya Sutra number 111. It's called Anupada Sutta. And I selected this discourse because it gives a fair bit more detail about the characteristics of jhana than we find in most of the Pali Canon. So in most of the Pali Canon, jhana is defined very briefly. And that brief definition is actually enough, as long as you understand what it's saying. This discourse gives a somewhat more in-depth listing of what's involved in jhana. So as I mentioned before, briefly speaking, jhana is a state of deep concentration where the mind, the attention of the mind stays directed at a single object of awareness without getting distracted, without losing focus, without losing attention. So sometimes it's defined very simply as a concentrated mind that is free of the 5 hindrances, free of the 5 obstacles of sensual desire, aversion, restlessness, sleepiness, and doubt. So when the mind is free of those 5 things, and it's concentrated on its object, then if you're not already in jhana, then you're definitely well on your way. So I'll read the excerpt from the sutta that I'm going to go over today, and then I'll explain it in detail. Secluded from sensuality, secluded from unwholesome phenomena, one attains and remains in the first jhana, which has thought and consideration, and has rapture and pleasure produced by seclusion. So this first section is your standard definition of first jhana. So jhana is normally divided into four levels of depth of concentration. So first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. For now, we're mostly just interested in first jhana. So if you haven't even experienced first jhana, it doesn't really do you that much good to start learning about third jhana, for example. So these things happen sequentially, they happen in steps. You can't skip first, second, and third jhana and just go straight to fourth jhana. It doesn't work that way. It's always first, second, third, fourth. And even getting into first jhana is already a wonderful thing. So predominantly we're interested for now just at looking at what first jhana is. So again, this is the standard description. Secluded from sensuality, secluded from unwholesome phenomena, one attains and remains in the first jhana, which has thought and consideration, and the rapture and pleasure produced by seclusion. So that's your standard list. This discourse is interesting because then it goes on to give a much longer list. So it continues. The phenomena which are present in the first jhana, thought, consideration, rapture, pleasure, mental one-pointedness, sense contact, feeling, recognition, volition, mentality, interest, resolve, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention are progressively identified by him. So normally we talk about the 5 jhana factors, the 5 factors of first jhana. In this discourse, the Buddha gives 16 factors of first jhana. So this is a bit more to work with. It gives us a clearer picture of what's going on. So, starting from the top, secluded from sensuality. So I already spoke about this a bit yesterday when I was talking about the 5 obstacles. When I spoke about the obstacle of sensuality, of the interest in sensuality. So of course sensual experiences are unavoidable. They're just part of being human. You have eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. So you're going to have sensory experiences. That's normal. So humans, by definition, are sensual in that sense. However, just because we have sensual experiences does not mean we need to be obsessed with them, attached to them, caught up in them. It means we don't need to be caught in the pursuit of sensual experiences or wrapped up in obsessing about sensual experiences. We can perceive the arising and changing and ceasing of sensual experiences without the slightest bit of affect in the mind. So secluded from sensuality then is not meaning that you need to stop experiencing your senses, because you actually can't do that, except in particular rarefied states of mind, which I may or may not talk about later in this retreat. But rather it's about pulling the mind back from involvement in sensual experiences. So seclusion from sensuality, pulling the mind back. So that approach is one of mental seclusion. So there is an element here of physical seclusion in that if you spend your day engaged in the constant pursuit of sensual pleasure, and then you sit down and you try to meditate, then what you'll notice is that all that momentum of obsession with sensuality that you built up in your mind is still there. So you sit down and you try to meditate, and you'll find it's quite difficult to get good concentration because you're still very much obsessed with sensuality. It's very difficult to put that down because you've built up so much momentum. So then taking some time to actually pull back from physical sensuality is something that does help us with our meditation practice. So this is why during meditation retreats, for example, we encourage people to refrain from sexual activity. You'll also notice there's no television in the house, and you were encouraged to turn off your phone, and not to use your laptops or entertainment devices. And also, to a lesser extent, why we practice noble silence. So these are, and also why we avoid reading non-Buddhist books. It's all ways of pulling ourselves back from our normal tendency to be wrapped up in sensuality. So it's pulling back from sensuality so that we can experience the mind. And this is also quite important because as long as we are seeking satisfaction in sensuality, we will not seek satisfaction in spiritual practice. So then taking a step back from sensuality, so clearing the mind and reestablishing our priorities. So we're not having mixed priorities of like, well, I really want sensual experiences, but I also kind of want concentration. No, actually sensuality. No, maybe no sensuality. No, yeah, that's not going to get anywhere. You really need to have a focused mind of like, well, actually, for at least these 10 days, I'm just going to focus on developing the pleasure of concentration. The pleasure of sensuality can wait until later, or possibly never. And that's okay. So actually that willingness to be okay with not having any particular sensual experiences is a great source of happiness and joy. So it doesn't mean that you won't have sensual experiences because, I mean, you're human, odds are you will. But being okay with it if you don't get sensual experiences is a great source of relief for the mind. It's like, even if I don't get that experience, it's okay. There's no problem. It doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong. So seclusion from sensuality. That's an important part of this. And so one area, though, where seclusion from sensuality gets a bit more difficult is in the area of food. Because it is necessary to eat in order to survive. And the Buddha did not encourage fasting. Sometimes Buddhists do fast for various reasons and various lengths of time. But it's not something the Buddha ever encouraged. But rather what he encouraged is moderation. So knowing the right amount in food. And the right amount varies from person to person. But basically it's not too little and not too much. And also more than just the quantity that you're eating, it's also reflecting again that food has a purpose, which is keeping the body healthy. So you might be going through the food line and you see like, well, that looks really pleasant. That looks perhaps less pleasant. However, the less pleasant food also contains important nutrients for keeping the body alive and healthy. So then we set aside our normal interest in sensuality and we take some of everything in order to properly nourish the body. So this is, again, it's viewing food in a different way. So we're often used to viewing food as a source of pleasure, as a source of sensual pleasure. But that's not particularly helpful from a Buddhist standpoint. Rather, we should view food as a source of health and nourishment. And the reason we do this, once again, is so that we don't get obsessed with the pleasure of eating. So we don't get caught up in attachment and desire in relationship to the experience of eating. For those who are really obsessed with food, there's some meditation techniques that are specifically for that, specifically for addressing obsession with food. You can speak with me later and I'll give you some descriptions. This has never been my problem, by the way. I actually tend to eat too little. So it's more a matter of knowing your particular relationship with food and bringing it towards that proper balance. So next we have secluded from unwholesome phenomena. This could also be translated secluded from unwholesome mind states. So this is more of a broad catch-all term. Unwholesome phenomena, unwholesome mind states. It encompasses anything which is harmful. So greed, hatred, delusion, daydreaming, resentment, spaciness, dullness. Basically all of the 5 obstacles are lumped under unwholesome phenomena, unwholesome mind states. But really anything which carries with it the flavor of either attachment or aversion fits under unwholesome mind states. And then within the category of delusion we have things like an incorrect understanding of the nature of reality, which unfortunately anyone who's not enlightened has to some extent. But more notably also the tendency towards spaciness and daydreaming, as I mentioned earlier. So this is a major problem with meditation practice, because when we sit down to meditate, there's no external stimuli, or there's very little external stimuli. So then, if you are prone to imagination, then you will usually within a short period of time, you'll start producing interesting stimuli within your own mind. You'll start producing interesting ideas and thoughts and images, and sometimes you'll create full-fledged realities in your mind. And this, of course, is a total waste of time. So from a Buddhist perspective, there's nothing wrong with creativity and imagination, except when you're trying to meditate, it's not helpful in the slightest bit. So creativity and imagination are all worldly phenomena. They're all worldly things. They're not evil. They're just kind of a waste of time in terms of our practice. So when we're seeking concentration, we set aside all unwholesome mind states, including setting aside the tendency towards daydreaming and imagination. This is one reason why it's so often recommended that one use a physical experience as your object of concentration, because it keeps you firmly grounded in something that is not subject to imagination. There are other meditation techniques which involve mind-made objects, kasina meditation or abstractions. And the major danger with that is that it's very easy to slip into imagination. It's very easy to slip into daydreaming because you're already working with a mind-made object. It's very easy to then just slip into a whole mind-made world. So when you're sticking with a physical object, so once again, I've been recommending your hands as an anchor for mindfulness of the body, so using your hands. It keeps you grounded to some extent in consensus reality, if there is such a thing. It keeps you grounded in direct physical experience, which helps keep you from getting lost in the mind. So if you actually completely lose touch with your body, there's something wrong. Come and talk to me. So you do not completely lose contact with your body until actually past the 4 jhanas. So the 4 jhanas are called the jhanas of form, the jhanas of physical form. Rupa jhana. After that, there's another 4 states of concentration called arupa jhana. So formless jhanas, jhanas with no physical form. So in those later states of concentration, then you actually don't feel your body anymore. But for the first 4 stages of concentration, for the first 4 jhanas, which is all I'm going to talk about during this retreat, you still have the experience of your physical body. So once again, if you completely lose touch with your physical body when you're meditating, you're not doing it right. Something's gone wrong, and you do need to come in and check in with me about what's happening. So at this point, I'll go straight into the longer list, the list of 16 factors: thought, consideration, rapture, pleasure, mental one-pointedness, sense contact, feeling, recognition, volition, mentality, interest, resolve, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention. So the first 2, vitakka and vichara, thought and consideration. There's a fair amount of debate about how to interpret the meaning of these 2 words in this context. So throughout the Pali Canon, these words are used to mean active thinking, like actual activity of mind. Like right now you might be thinking about what I'm saying, that's vitakka. You might be considering and examining the meaning of the words, that's vichara. So vitakka and vichara, it's actual thinking about stuff. Some interpretations of it in terms of jhana, though, give it a different meaning, saying that vitakka is applying the mind to the meditation object, and vichara is keeping the mind on the meditation object. That seems a bit strained to me, as it's a serious departure from how these words are used in every other context. So the interpretation which seems much more likely to me, as it fits the language that's used and it fits the context that these words are used in, is that vitakka and vichara, even in the context of jhana, are still referring to thought. So then vitakka and vichara is referring to that so in the first stage of jhana, so the first stage of jhana is when you're just getting into deep concentration. So the mind is on the object. So that's mental one-pointedness, which we'll come to later in this list. The mind is on the object, but there still arises in the background a certain amount of noise in the mind. Like the mind is not yet completely quiet. So the mind is on the object, but there's still a little bit of tendency towards thought that appears in the mind, in the background. And you don't get distracted from your object. Like you don't pull away from the meditation object to focus on the mental noise that's arising, the little flashes of thought, or the little flashes of mental movement that appear. You stay on the object. So again, it's kind of like right now I'm focused on this piece of paper, but in my peripheral vision I can see Venerable Pamuto, and in the peripheral vision I can see the window over there. But I'm not actually focused on those things. I'm focused on the piece of paper. So if I were to turn and look at Venerable Pumuto, then I've broken my concentration. I'm no longer looking at the piece of paper in front of me. So then in first jhana, as I interpret it, you're focused on your object, but there's still a peripheral awareness of some other activity in the mind. There's still a peripheral awareness of that background noise in the mind, which is not yet fully settled out. So that background noise fully settles out in second jhana, so it's a deeper state of concentration. But initially there's still a certain amount of noise in the mind. So you just don't allow your attention to drift to it. You keep your attention on your object. So this then is why, so first jhana is not quite stable, it's not quite steady, because there is that slight wavering of the mind, as there is this noise in the background. There's that tendency to want to pull away from the object. So you have to really keep your attention on the object. So it still takes a fair amount of effort in first jhana to keep your attention on the object, or it can take effort. And you have rapture. In Pali this is called piti. So rapture or bliss. So this is a incredibly intense physical euphoria. This is possibly the most distinctive characteristic of first and second jhana. So this is, again, it's usually the first really major indication that you've either attained jhana or you're almost there, is your entire body becomes suffused with this incredibly powerful physical euphoria. So this euphoria is better than any pleasant sensation you've ever experienced in your whole life. So it makes a very distinct mark on the mind. So again, often I'm talking to people and they're like, I think I might have experienced jhana once, and it was kind of nice, and I was like, no, that wasn't it. That was not it. Trust me. If you attain first jhana, then you know. You may not know exactly what it is at the time, but it makes a very powerful effect on the mind, because it is a significant departure from what you're used to. So again, very powerful physical euphoria all through the body. So this can start to appear before the mind is completely stabilized on the object. So as your concentration gets stronger, then you'll start to have flashes of rapture coming up. You'll get brief periods of piti, of rapture, or it'll be localized only in certain parts of your body, or it might come in waves. But you'll often start to get some taste of that euphoria produced by concentration as you work on your meditation object. So this is a good sign, and in fact you can even use that as your meditation object. So this is a bit more of an advanced technique. So you might, again, start with focusing on your hands. And as you focus on your hands for a while without distraction, then you'll start to experience some euphoria in the body. So then you can actually switch to focusing on the euphoria, focusing on the rapture itself. And that often will accelerate the development of your concentration. So that can be a shortcut to getting into first jhana, is you concentrate on your object until euphoria appears, then focus on the euphoria itself. And often it'll compound on itself, it'll build on itself, and bring you more quickly into first jhana, into deeper concentration. If you're using that technique though, again, do watch what happens. If you notice that your concentration is not getting stronger, then just stick with your main object. So if you switch to rapture too soon, then you may find it's not particularly beneficial. You may find it just weakens your concentration. So you do need to be honest with yourself about what's happening and how it's affecting your mind. So rapture, pleasure, the next object is pleasure or happiness, so sukha. So this here is mental happiness. So elation or joy or happiness in the mind. So it's a sense of satisfaction and contentment. So just that feeling of like, this is nice. So it's just it's not quite as exciting as euphoria, but it's more just that sense of like, okay, this is cool. It's just this nice, relaxed, happy feeling in the mind. So there's no trace of discontent or dissatisfaction. Once you start getting into jhana, there is no sadness, no depression, no discontent, no dissatisfaction at all. The mind is just happy. I should point out though that's not enlightenment. It's a temporary state caused by concentration. So what happens every now and then is someone meditates really hard and they get into jhana and then they think, okay, that's it, I've attained enlightenment. Which also gives you a sense of how nice the jhanas are. You're just like, wow, this is really good, I must be enlightened. But you're not. You're not. It's temporary. And the thing is, even after you emerge from jhana, then often there'll be persisting after effects, which can last anywhere from a few minutes to a few days. So sometimes even for a few days after you've had some really strong concentration, you'll be really chilled out and happy and nothing seems to bother you and you're just like, okay, yeah, I did it, I'm enlightened now. But then you'll start slipping back in your old patterns of getting irritated and annoyed and getting obsessed with pleasant things and rejecting unpleasant things, and then it's like, well, okay, actually apparently I'm not enlightened after all. So this does happen from time to time. So this again is why insight meditation is necessary. It's to actually change those underlying patterns instead of just suppress them for a period of time. So rapture, pleasure, mental one-pointedness. So chitta ekagata. So ekagata, eka, one, gata, gone. So the mind which has gone to one thing, one object. So again, you're focusing on your hands, and your attention never leaves your hands, not even for a moment. So normally what happens when we're meditating is that we put our mind on the object, and we keep our mind on the object for, about 1/10 of a second, maybe, if you're really, really good. And then we pull away and we get caught up in the sound of the car going by and the lights in the room and the thoughts in our head and the emotions that we're feeling. And then a few fractions of a second later, we put our mind back on the object, briefly. Then we pull away again to other things, and then put our mind back on the object briefly, away to other things. So that's normally what we're doing when we meditate. So then as we keep putting the mind back on the object, then the intervals become shorter. So initially it's like, on the object, gone. Then we start getting better, on the object, gone. Object, gone. Object, gone. Object, stay on the object. This is jhana. It's when you finally just stay completely on the object without any veering away. So without any lapses or breaks in your focus. So that's mental one-pointedness. It's the mind which goes to one thing and stays there. So that's the other major characteristic of jhana, first jhana in particular. The mental one-pointedness is a characteristic of all four jhanas. But again, the particular ways to recognize when you've entered first jhana are, first off, rapture, and second, mental one-pointedness. So the mind does not stray from the object at all, and you're feeling incredibly powerful physical euphoria. If those two things are present, odds are about 99% that you've reached first jhana. So, mental one-pointedness, sense contact. So there's still sense contact. So your senses are still operating. This is another important point, because frequently when we practice meditation, sometimes we get in mind states where we're actually blocking off our senses. We've narrowed down our field of awareness to where we're blocking off sound, or we're blocking off sight, or we're blocking off smell, or we're blocking off our sense of touch. And that can resemble concentration. And in fact, that is a particular kind of concentration. It's what the Buddha called miccha samadhi, wrong concentration, unhelpful concentration. So that is a form of concentration. It's just not Buddhist. It's not relevant to Buddhist practice, because it involves an element of willful self-delusion, of willful ignorance. So in jhana, in right concentration, in Buddhist practice, there is still sensory awareness. So sight, sound, smell, taste, and mental perception are all still functioning. It's just that it doesn't distract you from your meditation object. You stay on your object. So even as sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mental perception are happening, you stay on your object. So sense contact, feeling. So feeling, Vedana in Pali, feeling again is the, we normally talk of it as the three feeling tones of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. But it's actually clarified further in that in many discourses the Buddha clarifies that what it actually is that there are sensations which can be felt as pleasant, sensations which can be felt as unpleasant, and sensations which can be felt as neutral, as neither. So this is an important distinction, because it's pointing to what I was saying earlier about pain, in that the sensation itself is not inherently pleasant or unpleasant. Rather, there is a tendency to label a sensation as pleasant or unpleasant. Though in the context of jhana, so there is feeling present, and it's only pleasant feeling. In first jhana, there's only pleasant feeling. Pleasant feeling and possibly neutral feeling, depending on how you define some of the experiences. But there is no unpleasant feeling in any of the states of jhana. So that's another major characteristic, which is very notable. So there's nothing painful or depressing or anything unpleasant going on. This also is usually a very unfamiliar experience. Most of our lives we're experiencing a blend of pleasant and unpleasant sensations all the time. So when you enter jhana, then suddenly you're only feeling pleasant sensations. So that's usually something a bit unfamiliar, and thus it tends to take our attention. We tend to notice that. So it's feeling, recognition. Recognition in Pali is sanya. So this is the process by which we label or name or again recognize objects or experiences. So even in first jhana, there's still the ability to identify what's happening. So as we're feeling euphoria, we can identify it as euphoria. As we're focused on our object, we can identify the object, and we can also identify that mind state as concentration. So there's still that ability to recognize and label. So again, this is pointing to the sharpness and clarity of the mind in jhana. So in jhana, the mind is not hazy or foggy or unfocused or unclear. It is extremely sharp, clear, and bright. So again, there are forms of concentration where the mind is vague and hazy and foggy and cloudy. That's not Buddhist concentration. That's not Buddhist meditation. That's not helpful on the path to enlightenment. So don't be fooled. So again, a common thing that happens is Sometimes we start to get kind of like sleepy or dull-minded during meditation, and it feels peaceful, and it feels kind of pleasant, and there's no distraction going on in the mind because there's not really much of anything going on in the mind. And then we might think like, oh wow, I must have been really concentrated. But actually you were just half asleep. So this is something to watch out for. If the mind is not extremely sharp and clear, you're not in jhana. And in fact, you're not in right concentration. You're in wrong concentration once again. You're in, it's actually a delusion state. It's not helpful. So, feeling recognition, volition, cetana, volition, or intention. So we're still directing our mind. So the mind doesn't go on autopilot. We're still consciously choosing to stay focused. We're consciously choosing to stay concentrated on the object. So volition is still operating. And we can also choose to emerge from that state of concentration if we wish to. But the mind stays, but in order to stay in jhana, then we're choosing to stay with the meditation object. So volition is present. The next object, chitta, is translated here as mentality. So chitta literally means mind. And it's a bit unclear what that term means in this context. It could mean the application of the mind to the object, the application of the mind to concentrating on the object, as that's how this word is sometimes used in similar contexts elsewhere. Next object is interest, or chanda. So this is the chanda. It's also sometimes translated as enthusiasm or zeal. It's sometimes translated as desire, though that starts to bring up other connotations which are decidedly negative. So interest, I think, more pins it down precisely. So it indicates the ongoing interest that we have in staying with the concentration, in staying with the meditation object. Next is resolve, in Pali, adhimokkha. So this is that quality of perseverance, of dedication, of commitment, of resolving to stay with the meditation object, of resolving not to pull away, of resolving to restrain oneself from getting distracted. Energy, virya. So energy, it does take an application of ongoing effort in order to stay in jhana. But this is also indicating, once again, the bright, sharp clarity of mind. So when you're in first jhana, it is a very peaceful, enjoyable state, but you also feel completely awake. So you'll feel quite energetic, even though you're sitting completely still, absolutely still, in fact. That's another thing that's not mentioned here, but which is, in my experience, definitely an element of jhana, is that you are still. Like generally speaking, you will not experience jhana doing walking meditation. It's sitting down, completely still, you can experience jhana. So even though you're sitting still, you'll feel incredibly energized. Again, it's kind of like if your body was a dimmable light bulb. We spend most of our life with it turned all the way down to just like a hair above on. So where the light bulb is just barely glowing a little bit. In jhana, it's like someone starts cranking it all the way up. So your body is just radiant, just filled with energy. But it's not like the energy of like a little kid who's had too much sugar. It's a very peaceful, serene, soothing energy. So you're fully, it's like you're completely on, but completely stable. Mindfulness, this kind of goes without saying. Without mindfulness, no jhana. That's really unavoidable. So this is another critical distinction between Buddhist concentration and other forms of concentration which are not relevant to Buddhist practice. So in jhana, in a concentration in a Buddhist sense, there's always mindfulness. You are always clearly aware of your experience. So you may not know exactly what's going on. Like you may not know that what you're experiencing is jhana, but you're still clearly aware of what's happening, even if you don't have names or words for what's happening. And that's also mindfulness, once again, of the meditation object. The next object is equanimity. So it's interesting that equanimity appears in first jhana because it's normally identified as the dominant factor of third and fourth jhana in particular. But it's present right from the start. And the reason it's present right from the start is because if one is still caught up in desire and aversion, one will not enter jhana in the first place. So equanimity is not getting caught in attachment or desire to pleasant things, and not getting caught in rejection or aversion towards unpleasant things. So equanimity is that poise of mind, that mind which is unagitated by any experience. So this is interesting because even when you're experiencing first jhana, which is incredibly pleasant, so you're basking in this wonderfully pleasant experience, but there's also an element of non-attachment in the mind. There's a certain, there's a slight distance there. Of like, there is this incredibly pleasant experience, but if it ended, no big deal. It's just how things go. So there's an element of non-attachment present. Where desire and attachment related to jhana tends to appear is after you emerge. And then it's usually like, wow, that was great, I want that again. And that poses its own problems, which I'll talk about later. The last quality in this list of 16 is attention, which in Pali is manasikara. So once again, this kind of goes without saying. You have to be paying full attention to your meditation object in order to enter and remain in jhana. So that's a somewhat detailed overview of the mind state of first jhana. And that might sound like a lot, but it's really not. It's not that complicated. So what are we talking about once again? You put the mind on the meditation object, you keep it there. There's no distraction, so when other things appear in the mind, you can be aware of them peripherally, but we keep our attention centered on the meditation object with full awareness, a bright, clear, focused mind, so a mind that is completely awake and alert, and also with full equanimity. So not seeking pleasure, not running from pain, but just staying with what's happening with an undisturbed mind. So with that attitude, with that approach, once again, if you hold your attention on your object, then first jhana will not be far off. It won't take terribly long, depending on your particular predilection towards concentration.